Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie, and today we are going to be looking at The Jigsaw Man, a novel. This is book one of the Inspector Anjelica Henley thriller series, and this is by Nadine Matheson. This one came out March 16 of 2021. I feel really bad because she actually just published the second book of the Anjelica Henley thriller series, and that one is called The Binding Room. And that was published in July of 2022, so really not that long ago, and we totally missed it. Probably because it is a book too. So I got inspired to finally read this book. Carrie gifted this book to me, I would say probably a year ago, and we haven't had very much time to even go through a lot of books. So finally, I was like, I gotta read this. It's finally becoming fall, serial killer time. I just finished the Dahmer Netflix series, so I was like, I might as well keep on with this trajectory and start reading The Jigsaw Man. So let's talk about Nadine Matheson first. She was born and actually lives in London and is a criminal solicitor. In 2016, she did win the City University Crime Writing Competition. Nadine Matheson is a criminal defense attorney. Maybe she's actually become a writer full-time. I can't imagine how much time she has if she's a defense attorney and she's writing. Oh my goodness, what a superstar. So you can actually find her on Twitter and Instagram, and those are in our show notes, so make sure to stop by there. Before I talk about the summary even, this book is quite dark and I need to give you guys a warning. So this book contains a lot of grim, gory details. So of course this involves murder. This is about criminal investigative processes. We have blood, gore, dismemberment, all kinds of grim, grisly things that you would ordinarily find in a crime thriller. So if this is not something that's up your alley, I would go ahead, turn the podcast off, maybe go see another one of the minisodes that we do have that might be up your alley. Now, let me tell you what the summary of The Jigsaw Man is. And this is the first book of the Anjelica Henley thriller series. A serial killer and his copycat are locked in a violent game of cat and mouse. Can D.I. Anjelica Henley stop them before it's too late? On the day she returns to active duty with the Serial Crimes Unit, Detective Inspector Anjelica Henley is called to a crime scene. Dismembered body parts from two victims have been found by the river. The modus operandi bears a striking resemblance to Peter Olivier, the notorious Jigsaw killer, who has spent the last 2 years behind bars. When he learns that someone is co-opting his grisly signature, the arrangement of victims' limbs in puzzle piece shapes, he decides he wants to take matters into his own hands. As the body count rises, Anjelica Henley is faced with an unspeakable new threat. Can she apprehend the copycat killer before Olivier finds a way to get him first? Or will she herself become the next victim? Drawing on her own experiences as a criminal attorney, debut novelist Nadine Matheson delivers the page-turning crime novel of the year. It's vivid and addictively sinister. It will leave you breathless until the very last page. Now, we're going to get into my thoughts about The Jigsaw Man. This book is right up my alley. I have a thing for crime thrillers. This reads very similarly to Thomas Harris's Silence of the Lambs series, the Clarice Starling series. There's a lot of really good, clever things here. Nadine Matheson does a very good job creating a very sinister villain. I wouldn't say relatable, but you kind of can feel for him a little bit. I would say we have a very relatable protagonist in Anjelica Henley. There's other things in this book that I think are substantially better than Thomas Harris, and I hate that that I'm comparing the two together because they are very, very different books. But when we're talking about crime thrillers, I always think that, a lot of people are striving to be as great as Thomas Harris's novels have been. This book, though, not only are we talking heavily about two serial killers, and the mindset of two different people, We are also addressing things like racial and gender equality in this book. So Anjelica Henley, first of all, she's a Black woman and she understands what it's like to suffer assumptions based on her skin color and her gender. Not only has she experienced and seen specific cases like one of her friends, back in the day, she remembers a Black woman who was kidnapped and murdered as a teen, and the police weren't even motivated to actually solve this case until, of course, a white girl goes missing. And Henley, being in the police force, she doesn't want this to happen again. This is something that is commonly seen. So being a Black woman herself, these kinds of cases are really near and dear to her. Not only does Anjelica have previous history with a classmate, but in the community itself, we see that her position is definitely mistrusted in general by the community at large. So we get to see bits of how that affects Anjelica. So we have that in the background of this novel almost the entire time. And we don't have this picture-perfect detective inspector either. Anjelica Henley is a very flawed person, and she has moments of vulnerability that even can be cringeworthy sometimes throughout this novel. It makes her a more compelling character because we all have imperfect experiences, and we may do things that from the outside screaming, no, don't do that, but she ends up doing these things, even though she is an incredibly intelligent person. So since we're on the topic of Anjelica, we have a glimpse into the life of what it would be like if you were to be a detective at all. So this affects her personal life greatly. Some of the issues that they have too and that pop up is that her husband actually says and gives her this ultimatum in the book saying, you need to basically pick your job or you pick your family. And this is a topic that I think a lot of women can empathize with, where especially if they have children. And I would say it's even more prevalent if you are in a place where you're in a dangerous job, like being in the police force or even a firefighter, anything like that, even a nurse or a doctor, where a lot of your time and your hours are actually spent on the job and not necessarily with your family. Ordinarily, that actually harms most family members anyway, regardless of gender, but there's a power dynamic there that is a little explored with Anjelica Henley's character, because she is the one who's taking the dangerous job and it's affecting her time with her family, and it gets even more involved as the case kind of unravels. So that's an interesting perspective. Not only that, but Anjelica Henley does suffer forms of PTSD because Anjelica Henley ended up putting Olivier behind bars, but he actually ended up seriously wounding her, and she was put on desk duty ever since. She's recovered, but clearly throughout the book we see that she's experiencing PTSD. And when this book begins, she gets called because there's been another murder that looks suspiciously like the Jigsaw Man, so she's basically being told to return to active duty at this time. So this is kind of where we begin the novel itself. So there's 3 really important aspects of the novel that I think are vastly different and substantially better than, say, Thomas Harris's Silence of the Lambs. We speak about race, gender, PTSD, all of those things that actually do happen when you are in a position like being a detective and having to work through these really horrendous cases, especially something like if there was a case like the Jigsaw Man. That brings me to Peter Olivier. He's a really interesting antagonist. He actually kind of reminded me of Hannibal Lecter a little bit. He was almost like walking Anjelica through. In a way, Anjelica and Olivier were both trying to find this copycat. The origin of the Jigsaw Man is actually, and warning, this is additional potential triggers for some people involving sexual assault. So the Jigsaw Man's original killing spree was actually in revenge against soldiers he served in the army with. They were exonerated of their crime, and they brutally raped Olivier. So he murdered them, but he also arranged their bodies in puzzle pieces. So we have Olivier and Anjelica Henley both pursuing this this copycat who's actually not doing it justice. Olivier has a lot of pride for his work, so that's kind of an interesting perspective as well. This book is really gritty. It's actually very refreshing. It was almost immediately pretty brutal. It doesn't ease you in, which was a very interesting choice, but I preferred it. Some parts of the book were a little slow, and I would say that kind of is reflective of potentially the job itself, because not everything is this fast-paced experience chasing evil people. We have periods of waiting, trying to find answers, and it can be really daunting because we're constantly we're agitated. We're just like, okay, come on, let's figure out what step is next. So I liked that we get a bit of that essence throughout the story too, but that's pretty much how it would feel in real life if you were trying to pursue a really evil person, but you needed to wait on a blood test or a swab or something. So that was really cool. I like that not only was Henley a person of color, but we have another detective, Ramatour, who is also a person of color. And that's a huge overarching theme in this story. And it's something that you don't really see in a lot of novels. So I just felt like it was a very refreshing take. And this book is the first for me that really addresses a lot of those issues. So it was very good. And I'm really looking forward to reading her second book of the series, because Anjelica Henley, she's been a protagonist that I'm actually very curious where her growth goes. And it's been a while since I've had a protagonist like that. So I'm really excited to see where this goes in her second book, The Binding Room, which sounds just as grim and sinister as The Jigsaw Man. So definitely stay tuned when I do another minisode of The Binding Room. But if you are interested in crime thrillers, especially like Thomas Harris-esque, it's very brutal, very, very dark. The themes, though, are really important. So it's not just this hack and slash eye grabber. It's definitely has a lot of important themes that we need to discuss to this day. And we have a really intriguing protagonist that we follow. And it's really more centralized around her. Whereas I keep comparing this to Thomas Harris, where his books are about Hannibal, the bad person. We're focusing more on Inspector Anjelica Henley and her growth and what she has to experience as a detective. So I really enjoy that. Check out The Jigsaw Man. This is by Nadine Matheson. Also check out The Binding Room. This just came out July 2022. I'll be doing a mini-sode of that shortly. For more dark reads, you can join us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and our Amazon Live channel at amazon.com/darksideofthelibrary. We do more than just books. We do a lot of creepy stuff over there. If you're looking for some Halloween inspiration, that's kind of what we're doing at the very moment. Make sure to rate and review this podcast on your way out if you do have Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find us. And make sure to share this podcast with your creepy, sinister loved ones. We love to create a community here. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you next week.